one thing I would like to cover. We all come from the era of revolvers, steel frame pistols, alloy frame pistols. Then there was a scandium that Smith & Wesson used to do.
Yeah.
Then there was the great takeover of polymer due to Glock. What are your thoughts on the switch to the striker-fired polymer pistol versus the traditional alloy frame steel slide pistol?
We're not going back. Yeah, we're not going back.
I mean, when those guns came out, I was totally opposed to them, very outspoken. Guns are made out of metal, they have hammers. When you depress the trigger, the hammer falls forward.
We have sears and disconnectors.
And I was wrong.
I was the original heretic. We were looking at pistols, mid 80s. I'm saying this is like 1986. And I had my eye on a SIG 226. That's the gun I wanted to get. And I had, a T&E sample and shot the living hell out of it. It worked and all this. Boss, we need to get these. And I was down my LE distributor, and he said, look at this thing. And he handed me this plastic thing, Tupperware, And it was December, and I remember taking it out, and the range was snow covered, a lot of snow. And, back in the day, we still shot at 50 yards and that kind of stuff. I said, well, let me run, 60 rounds for this gun. I'll just shoot the qual course. 300 was a perfect score. Now, mind you, there's probably about 3 feet of snow all over the ground. It was cold, it was windy. And I shot a really high score the first time I shot this thing, saying, maybe there's something to it, but I don't know, we'll keep looking at this thing. And over the next several months, I ran something like 4,000 rounds through it, never cleaned it, and it kept working. So there might be something to this. And passed it around to some other guys, and they did okay. I guess the bottom line is, as the months turned over, I'd also looked at a Smith & Wesson. I guess wasn't even a 6906 yet, the 669, I guess it would be. And the gun didn't work well, and some guys had a difficult time shooting it. So it was between the SIG and the Glock, and it came down to, the deal was, we'll take all your revolvers back, and you'll get these guns basically for free, and you'll get all this other stuff too. And that's what we did. The SIGs were maybe like $150 more a pop. So that's how we ended up with these things. And I was branded as like the heretic by our friends in the Attorney General's office at the time. Nobody's going to have that's a terrorist pistol. People are going through airports with those things, and that kind of nonsense. I had, when I had my first Glock, I still carried my Smith & Wesson Model 19 Combat Magnum on the other hip because I didn't know what was going to happen. Is this going to melt on me or what? And this after running several thousand rounds through it.
Maybe you turn into a pumpkin.
Yeah, something like that. But our experience was kind of positive. And when I went to FBI Armor School, for example, I received a very special award. It's called the Order of the Golden Spring for having launched the most springs throughout the week.
Yes.
But my point is, my hands-on skills are terrible. My father was an airplane mechanic. My son runs 2 diesel shops. They have mechanical skills. I have none. That eluded me. But this is something I could take apart and put together. It would actually work. So that kind of sold me on that. So our experience has been positive. We're, I think, in our 4th or 5th generation of these things now. We just got the Gen 5 guns, and I'm not convinced that's the best polymer frame pistol out there right now. It's certainly the simplest one. The fact that I can take it apart and put it together, it still works. So there's something to that. I think the learning curve with these guns isn't nearly as steep as a double action, traditional single action type gun. You're dealing with one trigger press the whole time. And, we all had concerns. I'm sure everybody on this table had concerns about the relatively short trigger action. So these are going to be a recipe for ADs and whatnot. And my experience was the departments who took the short tour, if you would, and did an afternoon's worth of training, those are the guys who were shooting themselves in the ass, putting the gun in the holster and that kind of thing. We took days and days and days, and we've never, ever had a problem with that. And I think if you do a thorough training program, whether it was transition, now it's all, of course, new shooters, never saw a revolver before. it's not an issue. And I think this has been pretty much the experience across the board. I would just say that in my world, the law enforcement training world anyway, that gun handling is a lot better than it used to be back in the day. You know, it wasn't unusual to go to some incident and having cops point guns at you inadvertently. Now, you know, I wouldn't say it hasn't entirely gone away, but it's a lot better than it used to be. And the ADs I saw, or negligent discharges, if you would, with Glocks, were typically people who had the short tour, were taking the gun apart to clean it, forgot they have a round in the chamber and whatnot. There's another state agency in my state who got rid of SIGs a while back and got Glocks, and they have a reputation for having some unusual things happen with pistols. And I know in their indoor range what they do when the guys shoot the last string of fire in their qual course is they actually have the guys pop the slide off the gun and lay it on the ground, and then you clear the lawn, they go back and clean them. So that doesn't really speak too well for their attention to small details, but I'll leave that alone. But like I said, we haven't had a problem. I think they're easy to train people on, and I don't care if it's a Glock, a Smith, whatever. I think they work just fine. And I think, as John said, we're never ever going back. And now when I put like a steel frame gun on my head, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I got a boat anchor here, you know? It feels a whole lot different. So I'm happy, you know, that road we went down, I don't think we're going back, and I think it's just fine.
Well, you pick up a Glock 19, and then pick up that 1076 you're talking about, the FBI.
Yeah.
It's an impossible clunk.
Yeah.
No one's going to carry this thing, but by today's standards, it's a clunk. We're used to, you know, polymer frame guns now. We're not going to go back to those clunks.
Yeah. They're not sexy, they're ugly. You know, you're not going to win any beauty contest or whatnot, but, you know, they've proven to be extremely durable. I have one, my old service gun had over 100,000 some rounds through it, you know, documented, because I kept track. And I had that gun for 20 years. And I did manage at some point in time, the lugs on the barrel separated from the rest of the barrel, and pulling the slide back and the barrel's coming back with it. This isn't good, you know? But I would never be able to run, I don't think, an alloy frame gun that hard. And we were shooting a lot of that federal BPLE plus P plus stuff out of it. So.
Now, Moss, were you involved at all or dealt with the NYPD when they went to the Glocks, but then they had the New York trigger, the heavier trigger?
Yeah, I followed what they were doing with that. Back when John Serrar was head of the firearms training unit for NYCPD. They had started with a couple of hundred Glock 19s in the hands of experimental users, if you will. And they had some negligent discharges simply because these guys had been used to a 12-pound double-action trigger. In '88, New York State Police had switched from the revolver to the Glock 17. But they said, look, our guys are going from long 12-pound pulls to this. You've got to give it a firm resistance from the beginning of the pull and make it heavier. So that was the original New York trigger. If anybody watching this is not familiar with Glocks, in the original Glock design, the weakest link was the trigger return spring. It looked like something that fell out of a big pen. The take-up on it was like an old Mauser or Springfield military rifle for the first 3 generations. Long, light take-up, then you hit the firm wall, then 1/10 of an inch for the shot. And when you take into account fight-or-flight response in the human, if you ever saw a scared Caucasian go deathly pale, you are watching vasoconstriction. The body immediately starts redirecting blood flow away from the extremities and into the internal organs to kind of fuel the furnace for extreme survival exertion. This is the real reason we become so clumsy under stress. The finger doesn't feel that it's on that trigger. That light take-up isn't noticed by the brain. And then somebody goes, hey! And there's a startled response, and bang, a shot is fired. So the New York trigger replaced that little spring, a little A shape with the spring here. And the good things with it, first from the fight or flight response level, you now had a firm resistance from the very beginning of the pull that even in a vasoconstricted state, the finger could feel it and tell the brain, hey, we're starting to pull the trigger. Was this really our idea? Let's confirm. The other benevolent thing with it, it was much more durable. In all these years, I have seen one broken New York trigger that was on a Glock 20 that had about 10,000 full power, 10 mil rounds through it. It was cracked across the face and the damn gun still worked. NYPD had to take it farther. They went to what was then called the New York Plus, now called the NY2, and that brought the pull weight up to around 12 pounds. And simply, I think everybody here will agree, past the point of any diminishing returns. It felt like a combination trigger and index finger exercise tool. NYPD had it, although the last couple of years they had at least one academy class where they went to the regular 5.5 pound pull, and I haven't heard anything negative come from that yet. But we've got to remember back then that the period of the switch to the auto pistol in the 80s was concurrent with the switch in the emphasis on firearms training: keep the damned finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. And really, the wording should have been, keep the finger out of the trigger guard unless and until you're in the very act of intentionally firing the gun. Because if you think about it, ready to fire, when you put the thing on in the morning, you should be ready to fire if you need to. So the NY1 basically brought pull weight up to about 8 pounds in the standard 5.5. I personally think that the NY1 is contraindicated on the Gen 4 because the slightly changed geometry that they had to do with the fire control mechanism to get the interchangeable back straps altered the angle enough that they don't play well together. It's an extremely bad trigger pull. And finally, the Gen 5, I think, is the best trigger Glock has ever put in a street gun because it has the firm resistance from the beginning of the pull, but it's extremely smooth. The best comparison I could give would be the old trick that Glock finally approved, by the way, of mating the 3.5 pound connector that they developed for the target pistols with the NY1 that gave you about a 6 pound pull, but very smooth, very even. And I think right now the Gen 5 is the best Glock that they've brought out yet.
Interesting.
And you don't need to put a NY trigger on it.
No,
Just
I think that
comes
would be
that way.
redundant.
No.
Well, now let's go in another step from the old days to the current. We'll leave the details of lumens and all that aside because, oh my God, but lights, handheld and weapon-mounted lights. I think we all remember back in the day when 60 lumens was a big deal. Now they have 1,000, 2,000 lumens. I think they're like lightsabers. I also remember the day when they would say 60 lumens was too much, was blinding. And then we started going to the hundreds and now to wherever we are. I guess this is really two parts for us to talk about. Handheld lights, weapon-mounted lights. What's the best approach?
Both.
Yes.
Weapon-mounted lights are threat management tools. We don't do our routine searching, probing, what's that over there with our weapon-mounted light. I've known people to do that, and at best, it's rude. In the worst case scenario, should you have a negligent discharge, sweeping this thing over, bad things await you. So I think you need both of them. They don't replace handhelds. I have weapon-mounted lights on the guns I teach with because that's what the guys on my job have. On my personal carry gun, I have one with and one without. I have a Glock 19 that has a light. As a matter of fact, that one has the TLR 8. It has a little green laser on it. That's another story. But my everyday, Glock 48, no light, I have no intention of putting one on there. I actually have the early one that doesn't have the rails anyway. But I know some people on my job have upgraded and got rid of those original 43X that didn't have rails and the 48 didn't have rails, and they got the one with the rails now. But I really can't be bothered with that. I think you can probably make a go of it with a handheld light and most of the situations we could find ourselves with. They're handy to have, a weapon-mounted light. And again, for a police duty holster, I think there's a place for it. But the thing that a lot of outfits leave out is you have to, at some point in your training, show guys how to transition. I'm working my handheld and things are getting ugly, and when to go to the weapon-mounted light and how to manipulate it and that kind of thing. So that's once again an area that people avoid, or some trainers avoid. But one of my guys was telling me he was out at the scene of some incident, and that other state agency was there, and the guy had a surefire light in his G19, and he's pointing over. Well, you go here, or reading things with a pistol. A light with a pistol attached to it, I should say, and pointing this every which way. He's like, get me out of here. So a lot of that still goes on, unfortunately. They haven't quite got the message yet. So I had a case floated by me. He's an expert, and it had to do with a guy trying to manage a handheld and a weapon-mounted light, and got confused and triggered a round off and hit some young woman in the arm. They were in a house on a warrant. But that got ugly, needless to say. So I think it's an area that if you have weapon-mounted lights, you really need to spend some time and figure out what their role truly is versus using those for utility tasks, if you would.
So that makes sense. And now that you brought up a good point of having an AD, Moss, you've been in court enough as an expert witness. What do you think about the lights?
I totally agree with Mike. The problem is not the lights. The problem is abusing them. For routine search, find out what's going on, what's here, what's there, separate handheld light. Only when you've got an identified threat. We know that the burglar alarm has gone off. We know we've gotten a call from the store owner, there's an intruder in my shop, I've run outside, blah, 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 I think he's in the back. Searching with a weapon-mounted light in the home defense scenario is problematic, because very often whatever made that bump in the night was a member of our family, somebody who's got an absolute right to be there, who simply didn't tell us they were coming in late, or a member of extended family with a key that let themselves in for some reason. When you point a gun at somebody without good reason, it is felony aggravated assault. It's also a horrendous trauma if you have ended up pointing a loaded gun at your kid's probably not going to call into the cops and say, hey, I want my dad arrested. But that kid is going to be remembering that the day they closed the lid on your coffin. It's a terrible traumatic experience. The best advice I can give is treat the weapon-mounted light the way you treat the telescopic sight on a hunting rifle. None of us here would have anything but contempt for the hunter that goes around in the woods and he's too cheap to invest in binoculars or too lazy to carry them. So he scans for game through the scope of his loaded rifle, which means by the time he's figured out what he's looking at, anything he's looking at, he's pointing that loaded lethal weapon at. This is exactly what we're doing when we're doing a search, if we don't have an identified threat, with a weapon-mounted light. So the light is for last instant PID, positive identification. And continuing the analogy with the hunter's telescopic sight, I'm not going to say don't use the weapon-mounted light any more than I'd say don't use a telescopic sight. We don't know how many lives have been saved over the decades when a hunter coming out of the woods at dusk thought he saw a deer, and if he had Grandpa's Model 94, probably with the iron sights, probably would have cracked a shot. But the magnification of the scope showed him, no, it's some dumb yuppie from the city who picked the wrong time of year to go walking in the woods with wearing gray-brown Carhartts with a white handkerchief sticking out of the hip pocket. And we don't know how many lives were saved when the cop in the alley or the citizen at home in his hallway, and that last instant, the light on the weapon showed him that's his keys in his hand, it's not a knife, I don't have to kill this person. So I wouldn't say don't use it, I would say use it judiciously. Use it the way it's meant to be used. If you're a parent, you've probably spent a large part of your parenthood telling your kids use things the way they're meant to be used. Tell your own inner junior shooter, use this the way it was meant to be used. Don't use it like you'd use a pocket flashlight.
Good point. John?
I think for a concealed carry weapon, mounting a flashlight on it makes it a little bit bulky. It's kind of clunky when you get a flashlight on it. I know people who do, and they do fine with it. I don't have it on my gun, my concealed carry gun. But I do have a separate flashlight, which of course we can use with the gun when that becomes necessary. Most of my patrol officers have flashlights permanently attached to their guns. It's a very, very popular among the patrol officers. But boy, Mass makes an excellent point. We got to be so careful you don't use the gun as a flashlight. You know? Is that you? Mm-hmm. Forgetting you're pointing a gun at someone. Mm-hmm. So even when you have a flashlight on your permanently mounted to the pistol, you need a second flashlight that's just a flashlight that we can use without pointing guns at people. So at night I have, with my pistol, I have a flashlight next to my pistol, but it's not attached to it. If you can figure out how to attach a flashlight to a pistol and carry it concealed regularly that way, that's great, but I haven't found anything I'm comfortable with, so I don't do that, but some do. Dave? What do you think?
I think that a weapon-mounted light is nothing more than a supplement to a handheld light. The things you can do with the handheld light, where you can get it out away from your body and you can put it in nooks and crannies and stuff like that, just make it much more valuable. You can't do that. I mean, are you going to be using your weapon gun like this to look in that nook and cranny? I mean, the weapon-mounted light is only good if it's at the eye target line. So the idea that we're going to use that for searching and identification and all that stuff, to me, is crazy. I saw an internet influencer. That's the right title, right? Influencer? Yeah. Very, very popular guy. I don't know what his background is, but he's very popular. And they were talking about a video a friend of ours was all in when he claimed that you really didn't need a weapon light on your pistol. Didn't say you couldn't, just said it wasn't essential. And this influencer's got this light on it, and he's shining it at the camera, and he's going, this has got 1,000 lumens. Why wouldn't I want this on my pistol? I can tell you why you wouldn't want it on your pistol. If you don't know how to use it well. Think about it. What do most people do? They snap it on their gun, they look at it and say, oh man, that looks cool. Then they flip the switch a few times and oh, okay, that's how it works, and they shove it in their holster. Now, a fight comes and they actually need to use it. Are they going to be at an almost intuitive level where they can draw that, they can turn it on, they can move, they can turn it back on again? Because that's what you're going to do in a pistol fight. You're not going to have it on like a night watchman, and like you see in the tactical movies and stuff like that. You're going to flash it and do your thing, and you're going to move and stuff like that. And that takes a lot of time and practice to do that without shifting it around. What happens in that gunfight when you don't know how to use it? Now you're looking at your gun trying to figure it all out, and rounds are coming in your direction. That's the reason you wouldn't want it on your gun. Unless people are going to learn to use that weapon-mounted light to that level, I'm going to say it, I'm a FUD, no problem. You probably shouldn't have it on your gun. You shouldn't have anything on your gun if you're not going to learn to use it well. But other than that, I don't have much of an opinion on it.
Probably shouldn't have a gun.
Yeah, probably not.
So now that just opens up the segue to my next segment. The latest craze of optics on pistols. Now, we know going back to the 90s in competition in USPSA, it was popular to take a mount that went from your frame. It would go over your slide, and you could mount an aim point on top of that, a dot optic. And the dot optic did not cycle back and forth. It just sat there because it was attached to your frame. But now today, every company out there that makes optics has a pistol-mounted optic. Right. Hell, Taurus now has a revolver, the Toro, right, that takes an optic. So I'll start right there with you, Dave. What are your thoughts on an optic on a pistol for the civilian and for the law enforcement?
They're not essential. Now, what's essential mean? It means absolutely necessary. The reason I say they're not essential is because we've been fighting wars for centuries. And we've had very rudimentary sights on most of those guns. And the wars have been fought and people have died. That right there tells me they're not necessary, but are they useful? Yeah, I think they are useful. It would be like using an AR with iron sights versus optics. Now, when I decided I wanted to learn more about the AR platform, I bought several of them and I started going to schools. Gunsite, Thunder Ranch, Blackwater, all those places. And before going, you kind of learn what that school emphasizes. So when I went to Thunder Ranch, I used iron sights. When I went to Blackwater, I used dots. I did better with the dot. I do better with a dot on a pistol, but that's mostly due to my eyesight as I approach 70 years of age. Could I use iron sights? Of course, I used iron sights for decades, and I could certainly use them again. But I think the dot is useful, but it's not essential.
Good summary, good summary.
The effect of a optic on your pistol, a red dot on your pistol, I think the main effect is it turns a 20-meter gun into a 30-meter gun. It adds about 10 meters of a range. It's no doubt it's an accuracy enhancer. You can see all around the dot with your iron sights. You can't see anything below the flame sighting front sight. With the optic, you can see all around it, which means you can stay in your sights a little bit longer without having to drop out of your sights. That's the pro. The con, it adds bulk. It makes you battery dependent. Some people have difficulty, I've seen this at very close targets. When all I need to do is fire, they're consuming an extra half second trying to find the dot when it's not necessary. And of course, the counter argument is who's going to shoot anybody 30 meters away anyway? At least in personal defense, that would appear to be unlikely. But I can tell you this, you're going to have a hard time finding a patrol officer out there now that doesn't have an optic on his pistol. So it's become popular for law enforcement patrol officers. Is it a passing fad? I don't know. I don't have one on the gun I'm carrying right now. Next time you see me, I might. I've had them, I've played with them. I don't have one right now, but I will say I have had students who, in their 70s and even older, who have vision issues, and for whom regular iron sights are now unusable. The iron sights are just not usable anymore. For those people, that optic is a godsend. Wow, now they can be as accurate as they ever were. So I certainly would recommend it for people who might fall in that category. I know my grandson finished his Marine Corps training last year, and it's all optics, on rifles, of course. But so they don't do it. He didn't know how to use iron sights. It's all optics. I know with my M4, when aim points first came out, you know, this is more of this high-fangled shit, you know, and all that. Well, it is kind of fast. Well, it's not so bad after all. But with a rifle, of course, you've got that cheek index, so the dot pipes right up. With a pistol, of course, the advocates will tell you just, you know, get your elbow angles consistent, get everything so it pops right up. You know, and Dave would certainly agree with that. What about when you're flat in your back in a cold, muddy ditch at night in the rain shooting one-handed? Then how does all that indexing come into play? So there's that argument too. Final comment. For some people, they're very helpful. And my suggestion is if you're just getting into it, try it. Start forming your own opinions. Currently, I don't have one on my pistol.
Moss?
Basically, I'd be echoing John. They're no longer in their infancy, but they're still in their adolescence. There's still some problems with them. We still see some of them go out of zero unpredictably. We see a lot of problems with the interfacing mounts. I think direct mount is going to solve a lot of problems. make sure your screws are tight, make sure your batteries are up to date. There are certain lighting conditions, like shooting directly in a bright light or trying to work with a neck index with a conventional flashlight, that do not play well with carry optics on pistols. Particularly in four-season climates, keep the defogger on there and apply it repeatedly. I was teaching a few months ago in Fairbanks, and we had, excuse me, an Alaska States Trooper there. They've just gone to the dots after some concern about the deep cold really vampiring the batteries. So they're paying particular attention to the batteries, and they're using the paste version of the cat crap defogger, which they're finding to work better. So just as an aside, you don't want to be stepping out of a nice warm house, or stepping in out of the cold into a nice warm house, need the gun, and all you see is fog. As John said, there is going to be some more bulk on a concealed carry pistol, so take that into account and either maybe put it on a gun that has shorter height, or consider a garment that has a little bit more drape to cover it.
Good point. Good point. What about from you? You're in law enforcement.
Yeah, well, about 10 or a dozen years ago, I was at an instructor seminar down in Palm Beach County, Florida, and a fellow from Trigicon came out, and he had a Pelican case full of pistol setups. He had SIGs, he had Glocks, and he had M&Ps. So I grabbed a Glock, and we went through a couple different drills. So this is my first hands-on experience with a modern red dot optic. And like many old guys, the first time I touched this gun, I felt like I had my feet in a bucket of molasses. At first, I felt like, really, where the hell's that dot? And I wasn't pleased at my performance at typical combat distance. We get back to 25 yards and like, holy shit, we're doing really well. At 50 yards, again, at the longer distances. Clearly, there was an advantage for me. At that time, I really didn't think seriously about red dots for me or the outfit I worked for or anything like that. We recently picked up a bunch of Gen 5 guns, and at some point in time, they're going to go for optics. A few years ago, a buddy of mine worked for SIG. And he said, look, he said, he says, I'm not a red dot guy. He said, I tried it, doesn't work for me. And he was at my range with some of his samples. And he said, hey, if you want to try this out, just get a 320. He says, I'll give you an extra top for the gun, the slide barrel optic. And it was a steep learning curve for me. I went to a red dot course and that kind of stuff, but I felt like I was the slowest and the worst guy in the class doing this. After I worked it a bit, I felt fairly competent with it. I've since, I've got a couple different guns set up that way. I don't carry them. I think the point's been made by a couple of guys here. As you age and your eyes get crummy, it could be a help. Now, I noticed even with iron sights now, I really need something that really grabs my attention, as opposed to what I was shooting 20 years ago. But lo and behold, I think it certainly has application there. I think new shooters getting into the game who've done Xbox and video games their whole life, probably take to this stuff pretty quick. And there's been some good. I think Houston was an outfit who was training their new shooters on red dots in the academy, and other places as well. Another buddy of mine, a recently retired cop from Phoenix area. And his department's doing red dots for years, and he's been in love with them. I'm still somewhat skeptical. It's just not for me right now. Not to say it wouldn't be for me at some later point in time. When I actually had a full-time job and worked for a living, and I had an unlimited supply of ammunition, and I could sit there and shoot that stuff, till the cows came home and got competent with it, I'd probably feel a little more enthusiastic about that. But right now, I have a finite amount of ammunition and time available to train, so my carry guns are still naked guns, if you would, no dot on there. A buddy of mine who's a very good trainer out of Marietta, Georgia, he made a point that, he felt one of the illuminators with like a green laser was a better way to go than red dots. And I have a gun set up like that, and I can't say I disagree, but yet again, you're kind of limiting the environments and the light conditions you can use that thing in. So anyway, I think the jury's still out. At some point in time, whether it's 10 years or 20 years from now, when we have a body of documented shootings where guys have used red dots, and are we doing better with those? I don't know. But the fact remains that most of these things are still going to unfold inside of conversational distance, and it probably doesn't matter what kind of sights you have on your gun, as long as you can see them. So,
Well, that brings up the sights too. We've all grew up using tritium sights, fiber sights, white paint with tritium in the middle.
Right.
I mean, what are you guys' thoughts on still using tritium or some other derivative of sights?
I'm not wild about. I've never liked 3-dot sights to begin with. I think anybody who thinks you're going to line up those 3 dots in some horizontal pattern in a life-threatening situation is hitting the crack pipe. I don't think that's going to happen. I like something big on the end of my gun, a front sight I can really see, and I'm happy with that. Now, that said, I mean, I've got a couple pistols set up with excess big dots, a couple, actually, I have some fiber optics, but as long as I can see the front sight, I'm a happy guy. Whether it glows in the dark, you know, like obviously fiber optics don't glow, but when used with a light, either a pistol mounted sight, even a handheld, I can define the front sight. And again, getting back to most of these things taking place up close, I don't think it's a big deal. I think they do have a niche, any type of night sight, if you make a very, let's say even inside conversational distance, you want to have a piece of a target to shoot at and it's dark. I think there's something to be had there, but you know, our duty guns are set up with the last generation had, I think the Trigicon with HDs or whatever, the one with the U-shaped notch and that kind of thing. And I think the Gen 5s came that have AMERIGLO night sights on them. So I don't know, but I'm not entirely sold, like I said, on the 3-dot ones. I would prefer even a horizontal bar or something simple, but dots just aren't for me.
Dave?
I learned fairly early in my law enforcement career, confronting a armed robber coming out of a business, that you can't hard focus on your front sight and keep track of what their hands are doing. Can't be done. Don't care what famous big name person says otherwise. Been there, done that, seen it, ain't gonna happen. Since that time, I've been a big proponent of highly visible front sights. Whether you use fingernail polish, it's got a red insert like the old revolvers used to have, or whatever the case may be. Something that will allow you to reference that big glob of green or red or whatever it is while you're trying to chart whatever this bad guy's doing. I was in a surveillance unit where we basically targeted people we knew were responsible for a large number of criminal activity. We were shadowing a guy that was a big time, he had a big time operation. He was stealing John Deere anything and shipping it overseas. So it was a big time criminal. We were following him around one night while he partied, and he pulled into a stop and rob and went in. We almost didn't even get out of the car to see what he was doing. We just were gonna sit and wait. And we better go see what he's doing. So I come around and I'm looking up into the store to see what it was, and he comes walking out with a bag of money and a sawed-off shotgun. Turned out, we found out later that he'd run low on money, so he just decided he'd get some. Even though he's a smart criminal doesn't mean you're not capable of a brain fart. That situation right there, I was trying to look in the window. I had no cover. Well, you should have found cover, Dave. Yeah, right, okay. I come up and I'm on him and I'm giving him commands. Drop the gun, drop the gun. If he decided to come up and shoot, action beats reaction. If I hadn't had a front sight that had a bright orange tape on it, there was no way in the world I could track it and what he's doing at the same time. So as far as iron sights go, as long as it's something that you can find quickly, I have no real druthers. I mean, I worked with AMERIGLO. We made what was called the cap sight, which was basically a square, highly visible front sight with tritium in the middle of it. When we developed that, we got with an eye doctor, an eye surgeon, who knew nothing about firearms. You don't want to get a firearms guy because they have bias. And we made up this board, and it had different types of sights on it. And then he's looking at him, and he's going down the line, he's looking at him, and you can just see this puzzled look on his face. Then he finally turns and looks at him and says, you told me to find equal height and equal light, right? So I'm lining up straight edges with straight edges. Why do you got round things on them? He says it's optically confusing. Duh. So, I think iron sights are great. I think everybody ought to have them. I think they ought to be of a type that you can see quickly and roughly in a very rapid fashion. Other than that, I don't have any thoughts on the matter.
I knew your relationship with AMERIGLO, and I figured this was definitely something I was going to.
Yeah, those sights turned out very good, and I think they've worked out real good for AMERIGLO.
Well,
I've got a luminous front sight only. There's nothing on the rear side. That's a system I'm used to using, and I find it very useful. But when you have the 3 dots that you don't like, there is an advantage there. At night, when your gun is on the floor next to your bed, you can look down and get your hand right on the gun because you know the way the gun's oriented. Otherwise, you're like this trying to figure out where the gun is. So that is one advantage of having the 3-dot system. I've seen the front sight dot and a whole illuminated U in the rear, which is a lot of light. But of course, all it tells you is where your sights are. It tells you nothing about what's downrange.
right.
So it doesn't give you complete information, but it tells you where your sight is. I find it very useful. I've used them my entire career. I've had the 3-dot system, but I prefer the rear sight blank and just the front sight. That works best.
Well, you know what was so funny when we had revolvers?
Yes.
We had flat black in the rear, and then we had like a lime green or a red toothbrush piece of plastic in there.
Right.
And that worked out famously. Then we went to pistols, and we started making it complicated. 3 dots, bars, and all this kind of stuff.
You mentioned the square edges, the circular rear sight called the Cirillo style. That Jimmy Cirillo, named after Jimmy Cirillo. A lot of people really like that.
A lot of people like that. What I have found about it, though, is that U and that front dot got to be calibrated properly. If that front dot is too small, that U doesn't work near as well.
Yes.
Moss?
Nothing to add. I just underscore the point John made. For those of us that travel or go camping and stuff, when you need that gun in the dark and you're in an unfamiliar place, those green dots is just like landing lights on an airstrip for a night landing.
Exactly.